Have you ever met someone who apologizes for absolutely everything? They bump into a chair, sorry. Someone else interrupts them, sorry. They ask a completely reasonable question, sorry to bother you. They exist in a room, sorry for taking up space. They share an opinion, sorry, but I just think. They receive a compliment, oh, sorry, it's really nothing. Maybe that person is someone you know. Maybe, if you're being honest with yourself, that person is you. And here's the thing most people miss. This isn't just a quirky habit. It isn't politeness taken too far. Chronic over-apologizing is a window into one of the most complex and painful psychological landscapes a human being can carry. It is a story written in early childhood, reinforced by years of conditioning, and performed automatically every single day, often without the person even realizing they're doing it. And once you understand what's actually happening beneath those two small syllables, you will never hear the word sorry the same way again. Let's go deeper. The first thing you need to understand is that not all apologies are created equal. A genuine apology, one that acknowledges real harm, takes clear responsibility, and seeks meaningful repair, is a sign of emotional maturity. It's healthy. It's necessary. It's one of the most important social tools human beings have. It's what holds relationships and communities together when things go wrong. But chronic apologizing is something entirely different. It's not really an apology at all. It's a defense mechanism, a shield, a way of preemptively surrendering before anyone has the chance to attack. It's handing over your dignity before anyone even asks for it, just in case. When someone apologizes for things that don't require an apology, for having needs, for taking up space, for asking a question, for simply existing in someone else's orbit, what they're really communicating is this: I already know I'm too much. Please don't confirm it. That's not politeness. That's fear wearing the costume of manners. So where does this come from? How does a person end up here? For most chronic over-apologizers, the roots stretch all the way back to childhood. Children are extraordinarily perceptive. They watch, they absorb, and above all, they adapt. And when a child grows up in an environment where their emotions are dismissed, where conflict means danger, where love feels conditional on good behavior, they learn a very specific and painful lesson. Making yourself smaller keeps you safe. Maybe they had a parent who was emotionally volatile, someone whose mood could shift without warning, without logic, without reason. The child learned to constantly scan the room, read every micro-expression, and apologize at the first sign of tension just to keep the peace. The apology was never sincere. It was survival. Maybe they were raised in a household where personal needs were treated as burdens, where asking for something meant being labeled difficult, demanding, or ungrateful. So they learned to preemptively apologize for every need before voicing it to soften the blow, to reduce the risk of rejection, to make the ask seem smaller and less threatening than it actually was. Maybe they experienced repeated criticism from a parent, a teacher, a peer that left them with a core belief, buried so deep they have never once examined it. I am inherently too much. And simultaneously, I am inherently not enough. And so the apologies became a ritual, a daily, unconscious performance, a way of managing the painful gap between who they fear they are and who they desperately want to be seen as. There's a powerful concept in psychology called the fawn response. You've probably heard of fight, flight, and freeze, the body's three primary reactions to perceived threat. But there's a fourth response that doesn't get nearly enough attention: fawning. Fawning is what happens when a person, instead of fighting or fleeing a threat, simply appeases it. They become agreeable, accommodating, endlessly apologetic. They shape themselves completely around the needs and moods of others in order to avoid conflict, rejection, or punishment. They disappear into helpfulness. Fawning is most commonly developed in childhood, particularly in children who experienced unpredictable caregivers, emotional neglect, or environments where their own feelings were consistently treated as irrelevant. Over time, fawning becomes fully automatic. It gets wired into the nervous system as the default response to any perceived social friction or tension, and it shows up in adult life as chronic over-apologizing, compulsive people-pleasing, a near-total inability to say no, and a deep, exhausting, invisible habit of placing everyone else's comfort permanently ahead of your own. The tragedy of the fawn response is that it worked once. When you were small and vulnerable and entirely dependent on adults whose approval felt like survival itself, making yourself apologetic and agreeable genuinely kept you safer. Your nervous system filed that lesson under essential strategy. The problem is that the original threat is long gone, but the nervous system never got the memo. It's still running the same old program in situations that don't require it, with people who pose no real danger because it never learned that the war ended and you made it out. Chronic over-apologizing also has a deeply complicated relationship with self-worth. At its core, it reflects a belief almost always operating below conscious awareness that you are fundamentally a burden to the people around you, that your presence, your needs, your voice, your time, your opinions are somehow an imposition on others. This belief is rarely spoken. It lives in the body. It lives in the reflexive sorry that exits your mouth before the thought is even fully formed. It lives in the way someone shrinks in a group setting, overqualifies every opinion before sharing it, or thanks people excessively for doing the bare minimum of basic human decency. Psychologists have consistently found that this pattern is significantly more common in women than in men, and that is not a coincidence. Women are socialized from a very young age to prioritize harmony over honesty, accommodation over assertion, and apology over authority. Girls who speak directly are labeled aggressive. Girls who take up space are labeled difficult. Girls who assert their needs are labeled demanding or too much. And so they learn the way children always learn, to adapt, to soften, to apologize, to make themselves easier to tolerate in a world that repeatedly penalized them for being fully themselves. This is not weakness. This is adaptation. But it carries a cost that compounds silently over years. Here is what chronic over-apologizing does to a person over time. It erodes self-trust completely. Every unnecessary apology sends an internal signal. My instincts are wrong. My needs are excessive. My judgment is unreliable. Repeat that signal 10,000 times, and the result is someone genuinely disconnected from their own inner voice, someone who can no longer tell the difference between a valid feeling and an overreaction. It damages relationships in ways that are difficult to name. When everything comes wrapped in an apology, the apologies lose all weight and meaning. The people who love you stop being able to distinguish genuine remorse from nervous reflex. They begin sensing, without being able to articulate it, that they're never quite getting the real version of you, only the carefully managed, preemptively apologetic performance of you. And it traps you in a permanent state of low-grade anxiety. Because when you are always apologizing, you are always operating from the silent assumption that you have already done something wrong. You are living life on the defensive, perpetually braced, perpetually contracted, perpetually waiting for the next moment. You will need to make yourself smaller. But here is what matters most of all. This pattern is not permanent. It can change. Not overnight, and not without genuine effort, but it absolutely can change. The first step is awareness. Simply noticing when the apology arrives and pausing long enough to ask honestly, did this moment require an apology? Did I cause real harm to someone? Or am I apologizing simply for having the audacity to exist, to speak, to need? That pause is where everything begins. That small, deliberate gap between the reflex and the response is where freedom starts to take root. Therapists often suggest replacing reflexive apologies with neutral, appreciative language. Instead of sorry for rambling, you say, thank you for listening. Instead of sorry to bother you, you say, do you have a moment? The meaning shifts. The power dynamic shifts. And over time, slowly and imperfectly, the story you tell yourself about your own worth begins to shift as well. People who over-apologize are not weak. They are not annoying. They are not broken or pathetic or beyond help. They are people who learned, in environments that didn't always feel safe, to protect themselves the only way available to them at the time. They are people who are still carrying strategies that once made complete sense and who simply never received permission to set them down. Understanding that is the beginning of something that looks a lot like compassion for the people in your life who carry this weight quietly, and if you need it most urgently for yourself. Did you enjoy the video? If so, a thumbs up goes a long way. Don't forget to subscribe if you don't want to miss the next one. See you soon.